Steady, girl! Whoa! Easy now. I've got you.
Would we tertate learn?
The train lurched to a stop at the weathered platform, and Elena clutched her carpet bag tighter against her ribs, wincing at the pain that flared from the bruises hidden beneath her threadbare dress. Through the dusty window, she could see the small town of Serenity stretching out under the vast Wyoming sky, looking nothing like the bustling community Silas had described in his letters. Her fingers trembled as she touched the fading purple mark along her jaw, carefully concealed with powder she could barely afford. She had answered the advertisement for a mail-order bride 3 months ago, desperate to escape the hell her life had become in Boston. After her parents died, she'd had nowhere to go except to her aunt's house, and Aunt Martha had proven to be a monster, hiding behind respectability. The beatings had started small, a slap here and there when she displeased her, but they'd grown worse until she feared for her life. Silas Vane's letter had seemed like salvation, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Now stepping onto the platform with her meager possessions, Elena wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The town was smaller than she'd imagined, just a dusty main street with a handful of buildings that looked like they were held together by hope and stubbornness. She scanned the platform for Silas, searching for the man who matched the description he'd given in his letters: tall, dark-haired, with a prominent mustache and kind eyes. But the platform was empty except for an old man loading crates onto a wagon and a mangy dog sleeping in a patch of sunlight. Elena waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly, and still no one came. She sat on her bag, trying to ignore the curious glances from passers-by, the ache in her bones from the long journey and the growing knot of dread in her stomach. By late afternoon the truth had settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Silas Vane wasn't coming. Perhaps he'd never intended to come. Perhaps the whole thing had been some cruel joke. Or perhaps he'd simply changed his mind when he saw her step off the train, bruised and broken and obviously damaged goods. Elena had exactly $3 to her name and nowhere to go. The thought of returning to Boston to her aunt made her physically ill. She would rather die in this dusty Wyoming town than go back to that house of horrors. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Elena found herself walking aimlessly down the main street, her bag growing heavier with each step. She passed a saloon where raucous laughter spilled out into the evening air, a general store with its windows dark, and a small church with a crooked steeple. She didn't see the man until she nearly collided with him. "Whoa there, ma'am," a deep voice said, and strong hands steadied her by the shoulders. Elena looked up into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, broad-shadowed with sun-weathered skin, and hair the color of wheat. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat pushed back on his head, and there was something gentle in his expression despite his rugged appearance. "I'm sorry," Elena said quickly, stepping back. Her movement was too sudden, too fearful, and she saw his eyes narrow slightly as he took in her appearance. She knew what he saw. A woman who'd been beaten, who flinched at sudden movements, whose eyes held too much weariness for someone her age. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice careful and soft. "You look lost." "I'm fine," Elena lied, but her voice cracked on the words. She wasn't fine. She was so far from fine that she didn't even remember what fine felt like. The man studied her for a long moment, and Elena saw something shift in his expression, a recognition that made her want to run. He'd seen women like her before. She realized he knew what those bruises meant. "Name's Caleb Thorne," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I run a ranch about 5 miles out of town. You waiting for someone?" Elena's throat tightened. "I was supposed to meet someone, but he didn't come." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Silas Vane by any chance?" Hope flared in Elena's chest. "Yes. Do you know him? Do you know where I can find him?" The expression on Caleb's face told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Silas left town 3 weeks ago, headed to California, or so he said. Had gambling debts he couldn't pay." He paused, his eyes kind but serious. "I'm sorry, ma'am, were you supposed to be his bride?" The world tilted beneath Elena's feet. She swayed, and Caleb caught her arm, guiding her to a bench outside the general store. She sat heavily, her bag dropping to the dirt beside her. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I can't go back." Caleb crouched down in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "Can't or won't." Elena met his gaze, and something about his steady presence, the genuine concern in his eyes, made the truth spill out. "My aunt, after my parents died, I went to live with her. She hurt me. I answered Silas's advertisement to escape. I have $3 and the clothes on my back, and I would rather sleep in the street than go back to Boston." She expected judgment, or worse, disbelief. Instead, Caleb's expression hardened with quiet anger, not directed at her, but at the women who had harmed her. "You won't be sleeping in the street," he said firmly. "And you won't be going back to Boston unless that's what you want." He stood, offering her his hand. "My ranch isn't much, but I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Liu, who lives in a cottage on the property. She's getting on in years and could use some help. I can offer you room and board in exchange for helping her with the housework and cooking. It's honest work and you'd be safe there." Elena stared at his outstretched hand, afraid to hope. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me." "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over," Caleb said simply, "and because I know what it's like to run from something." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong but gentle, and for the first time in months, Elena felt something other than fear. The ride to the ranch in Caleb's wagon took them through rolling grassland as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Caleb didn't press her with questions, and Elena was grateful for the silence. She watched the landscape pass by, so different from the cramped streets of Boston, and felt something loosening in her chest. The ranch house was modest, but well kept with a wide porch and warm light glowing in the windows. Mrs. Liu turned out to be a small, wiry woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. She took one look at Elena and immediately began fussing, insisting she needed a hot meal and a good night's sleep. "You're skin and bones," Mrs. Liu declared, ladling soup into a bowl, "and you look like you've been through a war." "Something like that," Elena murmured, accepting the bowl with trembling hands. Over the next few weeks, Elena slowly began to heal. The work was hard but honest, helping Mrs. Liu with the cooking and cleaning, tending to the chickens, and occasionally helping Caleb with lighter ranch chores. He treated her with unfailing respect, never raising his voice, never making sudden movements that might startle her. When she flinched at loud noises or dropped things because her hands shook, he simply helped her clean up without comment. She learned that Caleb had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years ago and had been running it alone since then. He was quiet and hard-working, up before dawn, and often not finishing until after dark. He had a way with horses that bordered on magical, and Elena often found herself watching him work with the animals, seeing how gentle he could be despite his size and strength. One evening about a month after her arrival, Elena was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the barn. Caleb's voice was sharp with warning and then the pound of hooves. Her heart racing, she ran toward the barn and found Caleb struggling with a massive black stallion that had broken free from its stall. "Stay back," Caleb shouted when he saw her, but Elena could see he was in trouble. The horse was wild with fear, rearing and kicking, and Caleb was trying to calm it without getting trampled. Without thinking, Elena began to sing. It was an old lullaby her mother used to sing, soft and melodic. The horse's ears twitched, and gradually its movements slowed. Elena kept singing, taking slow steps forward, her hand outstretched. Caleb watched in amazement as the wild stallion calmed, eventually allowing Elena to touch its muzzle. When the horse was finally settled back in its stall, Caleb turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My mother worked with horses before she married my father," Elena said. "She taught me that fear responds to gentleness, not force." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Caleb had seen her fear, her brokenness, and had responded with gentleness. She had seen his struggle and done the same. As summer turned to fall, Elena found herself healing in ways she hadn't thought possible. The bruises faded from her skin, though the ones on her soul took longer. Mrs. Liu taught her to cook proper meals, and Elena's hands stopped shaking when she held the knives. She grew stronger from the work, and the haunted look gradually left her eyes. But it was Caleb who truly helped her heal. He never pushed, never demanded anything from her, but his quiet presence became a constant source of comfort. When she woke from nightmares, she would sometimes see the lamp burning in his window, and knowing he was there made the darkness less frightening. When she struggled with tasks that required strength she didn't yet have, he would help without making her feel weak. One October evening, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Mrs. Liu had gone to her cottage and the ranch was peaceful in the cooling air. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said quietly. "Anything. Why did you really help me that day?" "The truth." Caleb was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "My mother," he finally said, "when I was a boy, my father, he had a temper. He never hit me, but he hit her. I was too young to stop him, too small. I watched her flinch and hide bruises and make excuses. And I swore when I grew up, I would never be that kind of man. And I swore if I ever had the chance to help a woman in that situation, I would." Elena's throat tightened with emotion. "What happened to her?" "One day when I was 12, she just left. Took nothing but the clothes on her back and disappeared. I never saw her again, but I hope she found somewhere safe, somewhere she could heal. When I saw you that day in town, bruised and scared and alone, I saw her. I saw the chance to give you what I hoped someone gave her." Elena reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Thank you for giving me that chance." Caleb turned to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her heart skip. "You've become more than just someone I'm helping, Elena. These past months, watching you grow stronger, seeing you smile again, hearing you laugh. You've become the best part of my days." "Caleb," she started, but he shook his head gently. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you've been through hell, and the last thing you need is pressure from me. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. And if you're never ready, that's all right, too. You'll always have a home here. No expectations, no obligations." Elena's eyes filled with tears. But for once, they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of gratitude and something deeper, something that had been growing in her heart without her fully realizing it. "What if I told you I'm falling in love with you?" she whispered. Caleb's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "Elena, you don't have to." "I'm sure," she interrupted. "You taught me what gentleness looks like, what respect feels like. You showed me that not all men use their strength to hurt. Every day you choose kindness. Every day you make me feel safe. How could I not love you?" Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. "I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never regret those words," he murmured into her hair. "I'll keep you safe. I'll treat you with respect, and I'll love you with everything I have." Elena tilted her face up to his. And when he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, nothing like the brutality she'd known before. It was a kiss full of promise and hope, a kiss that spoke of healing and new beginnings. They were married in the small church with the crooked steeple. 3 months later, Mrs. Liu stood as Elena's witness, tears streaming down her weathered face. Elena wore a simple dress the color of cream, and Caleb wore his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Elena felt the last chains of her past finally break free. She was no longer the beaten, broken woman who had stepped off that train. She was Elena Thorne, wife of a good man, resident of Serenity, Wyoming, and she was finally truly free. That night, in the home they now shared, Caleb held her close and whispered promises against her skin, promises of patience and love, of safety and partnership. And Elena, who had once believed she would never trust again, never love again, found herself believing in those promises with her whole heart. The years that followed weren't always easy. Elena still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements on bad days. But Caleb was always there, steady and patient, reminding her that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was home. They built a life together on that ranch, a life filled with hard work and simple joys. They raised horses that Elena trained with her mother's gentle methods. They had children, 3 in all, and Elena made sure they grew up knowing that love was patient and kind, never violent or cruel. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Elena would think about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that train, alone and terrified and abandoned. She would think about how close she'd come to giving up entirely. And then she would look at Caleb, at the life they'd built together, and she would thank God for the cowboy who had found her when she was at her lowest and had shown her that she was worthy of love and kindness. She had come to Serenity broken and beaten, expecting nothing but more pain. Instead, she had found exactly what the town's name promised: serenity, healing, and a love that had mended all the broken pieces of her heart. She had found home, and in the end that was worth more than all the promises in all the letters ever written. Because this wasn't a story built on words in ink on paper. This was a story built on actions and choices, on gentleness and respect, on a love that had been earned one quiet moment at a time. Elena had been beaten, broken, and abandoned. But a cowboy had found her, and together they had built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. They had built a love story worthy of the wide Wyoming sky, as vast and enduring as the land itself. If you enjoyed this heartfelt journey, please share, like, and subscribe to US Wild West Love Story for more tales of healing and hope.
Forbidden desire in the Wild West. One touch changed everything. She was his healing, he was her addiction.